We'll now go to Mr. Seaback for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you've talked about in your statement and in answering to questions, you've talked about Canada's participation in the AIIB helps to promote inclusive global economic growth. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Uyghur forced labor. And so there's the UFLPA entity list the United States has put out, which contains a list of companies that the United States has determined uses forced labor from the Xinjiang region to mine, produce, or manufacture goods. Does the Government of Canada have a system in place to make sure that any investments that our money went into through the AIIB, that no projects that the bank has provided financing for violated the UFLPA entity list?
Thank you for the question. And the issue of forced labor is an important one, especially when we're having conversations about Canada's engagement in the AIIB. And I would note that it is an important one that has been on our radar longer than the time period of the review that we are engaged in. I'd note, for example, that it is an issue that the Deputy Prime Minister was raising as governor of the institution even last year in 2022 as part of her role as governor of the institution. And as the previous testimony noted as well, Canada's director on the board of directors has also been raising this issue with his counterpart directors around the table at the AIIB in respect of specific projects.
I understand raising an issue. That's one thing. I'm raising an issue right now. But there's a difference between raising an issue and actually assuring Canadians, parliamentarians, that no Canadian funds that went to the AIIB ended up financing projects that used Uyghur forced labor. And it's not hard to do. There's an entity list that the U.S. has published, readily available. I've raised it with the Trade Minister many times. Did the Government of Canada ensure that no funds from the AIIB that were invested or used to finance a project were given to companies on the UFLPA entity list? If you don't know, you can say I don't know. If the answer is no, you can say no, or you can say yes, we did. I don't want to hear about processes. I want to know if we did it, we don't know we did it, and if there's a process in place to make sure we didn't.
So, Mr. Chair, I think that the answer is it's an important question, and it just requires a little bit of context in understanding how the finances of a multilateral institution work. And two respects are important. One is that our capital that we've provided to the institution is not itself directly invested in specific projects. It is used to leverage on the financial markets those bond issuances that are themselves lent into projects. The second element that is important and is important for this conversation is the fact that Canada is a less than 1% shareholder at that institution, and therefore, when speaking about projects is important, but we do not have the ability ourselves to veto projects that are considered by the board.
Okay, good. I understand that. But is there a system in place to check where the funds from the AIIB are being invested to make sure that companies on the UFLPA entity list can't get access to those funds through bonds, through any other financing? Does the Finance Department in Canada have a system in place to make sure that those companies can't access those funds through the AIIB? It's a yes or no.
I'm afraid that I can't answer specifically to the question because I'm not familiar with the UFLPA list specifically.
Okay, would there be someone else at the department that would be familiar with that? Because I think you're pretty senior in the government.
That's a question that I would need to check internally.
Well, I would like you to give an answer in writing to the committee whether or not the Government of Canada has in place a system to ensure that any projects financed by the AIIB do not get companies on the UFLPA entity list do not get financing. Do I have? Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Seaback. We'll now go to Ms. Yip for 5 minutes. Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm just going to take 1 minute with Ms. Yip's
As you will.
permission. I just wanted to clarify, have the witnesses clarify, that the legislation that the member from the opposite side is referring to is not Canadian legislation, it's American legislation. And under what authority would Canada be required to follow American legislation? Or are we still sovereign? I mean, I'm just trying to understand. This is American legislation. Is that correct? And would it apply to Canada?
As I had indicated to the previous member, I'm not familiar with legislation of other countries and how it would apply to various institutions. And of course, the United States is not a member of the AIIB either. But with respect to specific issues of other countries outside of Canada, I would invite the members to speak with Global Affairs Canada about those issues.
Thank you.
So, Mr. Seaback, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm going to go back to the Uyghur forced labor issue. So Mr. Oliphant pointed out that was an American list. Yes, it is, because we don't have a list in Canada of banned entities. Despite the United States doing diligent research, Canada's not done any. So we don't have a list. But we do know that Canada is legally obligated under CUSMA to not allow for the importation of goods made with forced labor. You're aware of that, is that correct?
My mandate does not include CUSMA specifically, but so no, I'm not aware of that.
Okay, well, that is what we are legally obligated, not to allow for the importation of goods made with forced labor. That's the law in Canada. Canada has not seized a single shipment of goods coming from the Xinjiang region of China or anywhere else. And in fact, the United States is now urging Canada to stop the importation of goods made with forced labor because we've become a dumping ground for those goods because the United States has banned it. Which takes me back to the question of the AIIB. So do we have any protocols in place to ensure that companies that use Uyghur forced labor don't get financing from the AIIB?
As a multilateral institution, Canada participates on the board of directors of the institution, and as one of, we're not on the board of directors at the moment, but when we were on the board of directors before the pause started, we were a voting member making decisions with respect to the projects that the institution proceeds with, but we were only one voting member, and the vote share across the institution is such that Canada does not have a veto on particular projects that are approved by the institution, much as it doesn't have a veto at any multilateral development banks at which we're members. So while we can raise issues and we can attempt to find like-minded partners at the board table who can also raise issues with us, we do not have the vote share necessary to block individual projects ourselves.
So we don't know if funds used at the AIIB have been used by companies accused of using Uyghur forced labor. We don't have a system in place to look into that.
I am aware that there are instances of projects that have been approved by the AIIB where Canada and other partners around the board have raised questions about forced labor, and where Canada's engagement has not allowed for those projects to be blocked as a result of that.
So those projects went ahead then?
Yes.
So then we do know that, because we're an investor in this, we're a shareholder in this bank with Canadian taxpayer dollars, so then we can conclusively say that Canadian taxpayer dollars, to some extent, could be a very small amount, were used to finance projects where there was an accusation that a beneficiary of that financing was engaging in the use of Uyghur forced labor.
What we can say is that we engage in a multilateral setting through that institution, and that Canada does not have a veto on individual projects that are approved by the board of directors.
Went ahead, despite Canadian objections that there was potentially Uyghur forced labor?
There are 178 projects on
I know
the
that you just
website.
said it before. You just said it before that there were ones that you objected to, but they went ahead.
There have been projects where we have raised questions about forced labor. I do not know specifically.
Well, could you actually table with this committee the projects that Canada objected to as a result of their concern that the finances were going to companies that use forced labor?
Yes, I can do that.
Thank you very much. I just now want to go back to prior to Mr. Pickard's revelations, did the Government of Canada have any concerns about the governance structure at the AIIB, the fact of the 2017 National Security Law, the encroachment of the CCP in the bank?
There's a range of issues that are being discussed as part of the review, and there are a number of those issues that have been on our radar and have been considered and that we have been pushing through the governance channels of the institution for some time. I was not specifically aware of the allegations that Mr. Pickard has made with respect to the employees of the institution and whether or not they are members of the China Communist Party. And we have asked for evidence of that, and we do not have evidence of that at this stage.
Can you table
Thank you,
whatever
Mr.
these concerns that have been raised, if they're in writing or internal to the government, can you please table those concerns for the committee as part of this study? Can I get a yes or no?
Sure.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Seebeck. We'll now